In my 300 cycles as Chief Combat Instructor at the Galactic Military Academy, I, Commander Vex'lor, had never encountered anything quite as amusing as the human training methodologies. Amusing might not be the right word. Perhaps primitive would be more accurate, or laughably inadequate. I remember the day Marina Blackwood arrived at our prestigious institution. She stood there, barely reaching the shoulder height of our shortest Zentarian cadet, with that characteristically stubborn human expression on her face. Her arrival had caused quite a stir among the faculty. After all, we were the most elite training facility in the known universe, not some backwater training camp for newly discovered species. "Commander Vex'lor," she said, pronouncing my name with those strange, flat human vowels. "Reporting for duty, sir," and then she did the most peculiar thing. She lifted her right arm to her forehead in what I would later learn was called a salute. Several of my junior instructors clicked their mandibles in poorly concealed amusement. I extended all 4 of my primary appendages in the traditional greeting stance. "Welcome to the Galactic Military Academy, Human Blackwood. I trust your journey through the quantum corridors was adequate." "Yes, sir. Though I must admit, your artificial gravity takes some getting used to," she smiled, showing those flat, herbivorous teeth that humans somehow managed to use for omnivorous consumption. Later that cycle, during the faculty meeting, my colleagues and I reviewed her training regimen. What we saw left us thoroughly bewildered. "Physical conditioning through repetitive motion," Lieutenant Commander Vex'lor asked incredulously. "Lifting heavy objects and putting them down again. Running in circles." And this, I pointed at the holographic display with my upper right appendage. "They call it push-ups apparently. Humans believe repeatedly pushing themselves away from the ground will somehow prepare them for combat situations." The chamber filled with the harmonic trills of alien laughter. Even the usually stoic quantum combat instructor, Professor Thack, vibrated his crystalline form in amusement. "Their species has barely mastered basic space travel," I continued, trying to maintain my professional composure. "They still rely on chemical propulsion for most of their vessels, for void's sake. How they manage to qualify for our program is beyond my comprehension." Looking back now, I realize how that meeting perfectly encapsulated everything we got wrong about humans. We saw their reliance on physical training as a sign of technological and tactical inferiority. We mistook their emphasis on bodily conditioning as a primitive substitute for proper neural enhancement and psychic combat techniques. Oh, how wrong we were. But that would become painfully clear in the cycles to come. For now, though, we simply filed away Human Blackwood's training regimen under primitive methodologies and prepared ourselves for what we assumed would be a very short and ultimately unsuccessful attempt at completing our prestigious program. If only we had known then what we know now. If only we had recognized that what we were witnessing wasn't primitive at all. It was preparation for something we had never considered, the possibility that sometimes the most sophisticated solution isn't always the best one. The first training cycle began with what the humans apparently called a warm-up routine. While our cadets initialized their neural enhancement protocols and calibrated their psychic barriers, Marina Blackwood began jumping in place. "What in the 7 spiral arms is she doing?" whispered Cadet Nexus, his compound eyes splitting into their component facets in confusion. I watched as she transitioned from jumping to stretching her limbs in various directions. The entire display was so bizarre that several of our crystalline cadets nearly fractured themselves from vibrating with suppressed laughter. "This is their species' standard preparation protocol," I explained, trying to maintain my professional demeanor. "They call it jumping jacks and stretching apparently. It helps prevent damage to their muscle fibers." Then came the running. By the void, the running. While our cadets practiced quantum displacement and short-range teleportation, Marina simply ran. Round and round the training complex she went, her feet repeatedly impacting the ground in what seemed like the most inefficient form of movement possible. Commander Cadet Plexnay approached me, her bioluminescent spots pulsing with confusion. "Should we inform Human Blackwood that we have gravitational manipulation technology? She seems to be unaware that she could simply adjust local gravity to increase her speed." "No, Cadet Plex NA, I responded, my secondary appendages twitching with amusement. "This is apparently their preferred method of building what they call endurance." The real entertainment began when Marina dropped to the ground and began her push-ups. Even our most disciplined senior cadets couldn't contain themselves. The sight of a sentient being voluntarily lying face down and pushing themselves up and down was simply too much. 58, 59, 60 Marina counted under her breath, completely ignoring the chorus of alien laughter around her. Cadet Xerix, a particularly promising quantum manipulator, floated over to where Marina was exercising. "Human Blackwood," he said, his voice modulator barely containing his amusement, "you do realize we have molecular strength enhancers. This repetitive motion serves no practical purpose." Marina paused in her plank position, sweat dripping from her forehead. Now that would surely make her see the primitiveness of her methods, I thought. "Thank you, Cadet Xerix," she replied, her voice steady despite her elevated respiratory rate. "But what happens when your molecular enhancers fail? When your quantum fields collapse? When your neural networks go dark?" The training chamber fell silent. Even I found myself momentarily speechless. 61, she continued, lowering herself back down. Over the next few cycles, Marina's routine became something of a spectacle. Cadets would gather to watch her peculiar exercises, placing bets on how long she would continue before requesting proper enhancement technology. She added new elements to her routine, something called burpees, that looked like a seizure had been formalized into an exercise, and planks which involved staying completely still while supporting her body weight on her forearms. Commander Lieutenant Vex'lor approached me one day, her neural tendrils twisting with concern. "The human's primitive methods are causing disruption among the cadets. Perhaps we should require her to conform to standard training protocols." I watched as Marina completed her 100th squat of the day. Despite the constant mockery, despite the daily demonstrations of vastly superior technology, she persisted. There was something almost admirable about her stubbornness, though I would never have admitted it at the time. "No," I replied, surprising myself. "Let her continue. It will serve as an excellent object lesson when she fails her first real combat scenario. Sometimes, Lieutenant, the best teaching tool is a spectacular failure." Oh, how those words would come back to haunt me. But for now, we continued to watch and laugh as Marina Blackwood stubbornly performed her primitive exercises day after day, cycle after cycle. None of us understood then that we weren't watching persistence. We were watching preparation. And soon enough, we would all learn exactly what she was preparing for. The crisis simulation test arrived on the 17th cycle of the third quarter. It was standard procedure. We always tested cadets under extreme conditions. Usually, it resulted in a showcase of advanced quantum abilities and neural-enhanced decision-making. This time, however, things went very differently. "Begin simulation sequence 47 Alpha," I commanded, activating the neural interface. The training chamber transformed into the bridge of a Drachnid-class battlecruiser. 20 of our most promising cadets and one human materialized at their stations. Scenario parameters announced the AI. Complete systems failure. Quantum core breach imminent. Artificial gravity malfunctioning. Neural enhancement grid offline. Life support compromised. Time to catastrophic failure 15 minutes. I smiled inwardly. This scenario was designed to push cadets to their absolute limits. Without their usual technological advantages, they would need to think creatively. But more importantly, it would finally prove the inadequacy of human Blackwood's primitive methods. The first 5 minutes were absolute chaos. Cadet Xerix attempted to quantum shift to the engine room, forgetting that the simulation had disabled such abilities. He promptly collapsed, his enhanced muscles useless without their power source. Cadet Plex NA's bioluminescence flickered frantically as she tried and failed to interface with the ship's neural network. "This is impossible," shouted Cadet Nexus, his compound eyes rapidly shifting colors in distress. "Without quantum manipulation, without neural enhancement, without..." "Listen up," Marina's voice cut through the panic like a plasma torch through hull plating. "Nexus, Plex NA manual override on the containment field. You'll find the access panel under the main console." But we can't interface with it," Plex NA protested. "You have hands, don't you? Use them." Marina was already moving, pulling herself along the walls as the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. "Xerix, stop trying to teleport and help me with these emergency seals. The old-fashioned way, pull the lever." I watched in astonishment as the human took command. She wasn't using any advanced technology. No neural interfaces, no quantum manipulation, no psychic linkages. She was using muscle memory, physical strength, raw endurance. The containment field controls are too heavy without enhancement, Nexus complained, struggling with the manual override. Marina reached the panel, sweat already beading on her forehead. This is why we do push-ups, she grunted, throwing her body weight against the lever. It moved with a grinding screech. 10 minutes in, the cadets were panting, straining, and most surprisingly succeeding. Under Marina's guidance, they were actually making progress. Those countless hours of physical training suddenly didn't seem so primitive. Commander Lieutenant Vex'lor whispered beside me. She's actually leading them through this. Core containment at 60%, announced the AI. Life support stabilizing. Emergency power restored to critical systems. I watched as Marina directed the exhausted cadets, her own muscles trembling from exertion but her voice never wavering. The simulation timer ticked down 3 minutes. 2 minutes. 1. Simulation complete, the AI announced. Catastrophic failure averted. Crew survival rate 100%. New Academy record for Scenario 47 Alpha. As the holographic battlecruiser faded away, I saw something I'd never witnessed before in all my cycles of training. The alien cadets were looking at the human with respect. Marina stood there, drenched in sweat, breathing heavily, but standing tall. But how? Cadet Xerix asked, still sprawled on the floor. Without our enhancements. Because sometimes, Marina replied, offering him a hand up. The most reliable technology is no technology at all. I made a note in my neural log that day, one that would fundamentally change our training protocols. Perhaps there's more to human resilience than meets the eye. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of our education in human methods. And Marina Blackwood? She was just getting started. N01 expected the solar flare. Our quantum prediction matrices should have warned us. Our neural networks should have detected it. Our crystalline sensor arrays should have given us at least some indication. They didn't. When the electromagnetic pulse hit the Galactic Military Academy station, it hit hard. I was in my office, reviewing training protocols, when every system went dark. Not just the non-essential ones, everything. The quantum core containment, neural enhancement grid, artificial gravity, life support, even the basic power systems. In an instant, our mighty station was reduced to a cold, dark piece of metal floating in space. Emergency status report, I called out, my vocal apparatus straining without its usual electronic enhancement. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the screaming started. Cadets and instructors alike found themselves suddenly cut off from the technology they'd relied on their entire lives. Quantum-dependent species began to phase erratically. Crystalline beings struggled to maintain their form without their stabilization fields. Even I felt naked, vulnerable, my neural connections severed for the first time in centuries. Everyone remained calm, I shouted into the darkness, but calm was the last thing on anyone's mind. In the emergency lighting's dim red glow, I could see panic spreading faster than a quantum virus. That's when the station's structure groaned. A sound no space station should ever make. Hull breach on levels 3 through 7, someone screamed. Gravity plating failing throughout the station. Through the chaos, a voice rang out. Clear, controlled, human. Listen up. This is Cadet Blackwood. If you can hear my voice, acknowledge with any sound you can make. A chorus of clicks, whistles, and voices responded from the darkness. Marina's voice continued, steady as a neutron star. This is what we're going to do. Everyone find a solid surface and brace yourselves. The gravity is going to fail completely in about 30 seconds. When it does, use your limbs to push off surfaces, just like we practiced in physical training. I heard several nervous laughs. Those pointless exercises she'd insisted on teaching suddenly didn't seem so pointless. Commander Vex'lor, she called out. Here, Cadet Blackwood. Sir, we need to get to the emergency manual override for the containment fields. It's 6 decks down. Without gravity or quantum displacement, we'll have to climb. Climb? The word itself seemed primitive. But as the gravity finally gave out completely, I watched in amazement as Marina navigated the weightless environment with practiced ease, using the very techniques she'd been training others to use. Remember your grip strength exercises, she shouted as she helped a struggling crystalline cadet anchor himself to a wall. Use your core muscles to stabilize, just like in those planks you all laughed at. Over the next 2 hours, I witnessed something extraordinary. Marina organized the cadets and staff into teams, using their physical capabilities in ways none of us had considered. Crystalline beings were positioned at junctions to provide light. Species with multiple limbs were stationed along the routes to help others navigate. Everyone was put to use based on their natural, not technological, abilities. The station continued to groan and shudder. Warning systems, operating on basic backup power, screamed about multiple failures. But Marina kept everyone focused, kept them moving, kept them working. Sir, she turned to me as we manually cranked another emergency seal into place. In basic training on Earth, they taught us that technology can fail. But the human body, and I'm guessing most alien bodies too, can adapt, can endure, can survive. I watched as she tied off another safety line, her muscles straining but her movements precise. These weren't just exercises she'd been doing. They were survival skills she'd been teaching, skills we'd been too proud, too dependent on our technology to recognize. The next impact rocked the station hard. Without gravity, bodies flew in every direction. But thanks to Marina's preparations, everyone was tethered, secured, ready. Manual override engaged, came a shout from below. Containment fields holding. Life support restored to minimal levels, backup power systems responding. One by one, systems began to come back online. Not the advanced ones, those were fried. But the basic physical fail-safes, the ones we'd dismissed as outdated, the ones Marina had insisted on maintaining, they held. As the emergency lights flickered back to full power, I looked around at my station crew. They were exhausted, sore, and drenched in sweat. But they were alive. And they were looking at Marina Blackwood with an expression I'd never seen before, not amusement, not condescension, but pure, unadulterated respect. Commander Marina approached me, still catching her breath. Permission to institute mandatory physical training for all personnel. I looked at her, then at the crew practicing their new zero-gravity movement techniques, then back at her. Permission granted, Cadet Blackwood. Or, should I say, Lieutenant Blackwood. She smiled, but there was no triumph in it, just determination. Thank you, sir. We should start with emergency protocol drills. After all, we never know when technology might fail us again. Indeed, we didn't. And thanks to one human's persistence, next time we would be ready. The Grand Council meeting following the solar flare incident was unlike any in the Academy's history. All 12 members of the council sat in their ceremonial chambers, their various appendages and sensory organs focused intently on the holovids playing before them, recordings of how a single human cadet had saved the most prestigious military institution in the galaxy. Remarkable, breathed High Counselor Vorthak, his crystalline form glowing with intense blue light. Simply remarkable. I stood at attention, waiting for the council's judgment. Beside me, Lieutenant Blackwood maintained perfect parade rest posture, another one of those human military traditions we'd once mocked. Commander Vex'lor, Counselor Nix Tara's neural tendrils writhed thoughtfully. You are proposing a complete overhaul of our training protocols. Yes, Counselor. Recent events have demonstrated critical vulnerabilities in our current methods. You mean to tell us, rumbled Counselor Dex, then his massive form shifting with skepticism, that we should abandon our advanced training techniques in favor of physical exertion? Marina stepped forward. If I may, counselors, at their collective gesture of assent, she continued. The proposal isn't to abandon advanced training, but to complement it. Think of it as redundancy in our combat systems. When one fails, another takes its place. The council chamber filled with thoughtful murmurs. I watched their reactions with growing satisfaction. 3 cycles ago, I would have dismissed such a suggestion immediately. Now I found myself nodding in agreement. Show them, I said quietly. Marina pressed a button on her datapad, and new holovids appeared. They showed the changes already taking place in the Academy. Quantum warriors learning to fight without their enhancements. Crystalline beings practicing physical stability techniques. Even the ethereal species, who rarely took solid form, were learning to maintain cohesion without technological assistance. The results speak for themselves, I continued. Combat readiness has increased by 40%. Emergency response times have improved by 60%. And most importantly, cadet confidence in non-enhanced situations has risen by over 200%. High Counselor Vorthak raised his ceremonial staff. Lieutenant Blackwood, approach. She moved forward with that characteristic human grace we'd once considered so inefficient. Now I recognized it for what it was: natural control over every muscle, every movement. "You have shown us something we had forgotten." Vorthak's voice resonated through the chamber. "In our rush to advance, we neglected our foundations. This oversight ends today." The council's decision was unanimous. The Academy's curriculum would be restructured. Every cadet would now undergo what they termed resilience training, a program that Marina would design and oversee. But they weren't finished. Lieutenant Blackwood. Vorthak continued, "Your actions during the crisis, combined with your innovative training methods, demonstrate leadership qualities of the highest order. The Council hereby promotes you to the rank of Commander, with full authority over the Academy's new Resilience Division." I felt a surge of pride as Marina accepted her new rank insignia. The human who had once been the object of our ridicule was now one of the highest-ranking officers in the Academy. As we left the council chamber, I noticed something extraordinary. The cadets we passed in the corridors were different. Where once they would have been floating or teleporting, many were walking. Where they once would have used neural interfaces, they were practicing manual controls. And most surprisingly, in one of the training rooms, I saw a group of senior instructors attempting what appeared to be burpees. "Commander Blackwood," I said, enjoying how the new title sounded, "I believe I owe you an apology." She turned to me, that familiar determined look in her eyes. "No, Commander Vex'lor, you don't. You gave me the chance to prove myself. That's all any human asks for." "Nevertheless, I was wrong about human methods being primitive." She smiled. "They are primitive, Commander. That's what makes them work. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most reliable." I watched as she headed off to oversee her first official training session as commander. In the distance, I could hear her voice calling out, "Down, up, down, up." And for the first time in my long career, I found myself wondering if perhaps I should join in. After all, you never know when you might need to do a push-up to save the galaxy. The Kravnari attack came without warning. 3 warships dropped out of quantum space, their neural scrambling weapons already powering up. They had clearly done their research. Their first strike targeted our quantum enhancement grid, then our neural networks, and finally our advanced weapon systems. They expected us to be helpless. They were wrong. Battle Station's Commander Blackwood's voice rang through the Academy's corridors. Condition read. "This is not a drill." I watched from the command center as our cadets and staff responded. There was no panic this time, no chaos. Instead, I witnessed the fruits of our new training program in action. The Kravnari boarding parties breached our hull on 3 levels, expecting to find confused, technology-dependent defenders. Instead, they met squads of cadets who were just as comfortable fighting hand-to-hand as they were with quantum weapons. Section 3. "Form up," shouted Cadet Nexus, his compound eyes focusing sharply as he led his team in a physical combat formation. "Remember your endurance training." Through the security feeds, I watched as Marina's methods proved their worth. Crystalline beings maintained their forms through pure physical discipline when their stabilization fields went down. Quantum warriors, cut off from their enhancement technology, used their physically trained muscles to hold choke points. Commander Marina called out, her voice steady as she coordinated the defense. "They're pushing toward the quantum core." "Not for long," I replied, feeling the burn in my muscles as I helped barricade a corridor. Those morning exercise sessions were paying off. The battle raged for hours. The Kravnari, expecting an easy victory over helpless technologically dependent defenders, instead found themselves facing an enemy that grew stronger as more systems went down. The turning point came when they breached the main reactor chamber. Their neural scramblers had disabled every piece of advanced technology in the room. But they hadn't counted on Commander Blackwood's insistence that every engineer learn to operate the manual overrides physically. "Pull those levers now," Marina shouted, her own muscles straining as she held a emergency containment door shut, just like in training. The Kravnari never stood a chance. Their reliance on technology became their weakness, while our newfound resilience became our strength. When the last boarding party retreated, they left behind not just their wounded, but their pride. As the all-clear signal sounded, I found Marina in the main defense control room, sweaty but triumphant. "You know what this means, Commander Blackwood." She grinned, still catching her breath. "Tomorrow's training session is going to be very well attended." I laughed. "Indeed." Though I believe some of our cadets might skip the push-ups. They've had quite enough exercise for one day. The academy had faced its ultimate test, and thanks to one human's persistence, we had passed with flying colors. Or as Marina would say, with sweat and muscle. Now, as I prepare to retire from my position as Chief Combat Instructor, I can't help but laugh at the irony of it all. The latest batch of cadets couldn't imagine our academy without the combined training programs. They gasp in horror when we tell them how we once relied solely on technological enhancements. Commander Blackwood has moved on to greater things. She now heads the entire Galactic Defense Forces training division. But her legacy lives on in every drop of sweat on our training room floors, every grunt of effort in our physical combat classes, and yes, even in the countless push-ups that are now as much a part of our routine as quantum calibration. The other day, I overheard two new cadets talking after their morning exercise session. Can you believe one said that some species still rely entirely on technological enhancements for combat? How primitive, the other replied, while catching their breath from their fifth set of burpees. I had to suppress a laugh. The great wheel of time turns, and what was once considered primitive becomes advanced, while what was thought advanced reveals itself to be primitive. Here's the real joke, though. I've started to enjoy these physical training sessions. There's something satisfying about feeling your own muscles work, about knowing you can function without neural enhancement or quantum assistance. Though I'll deny saying this if anyone asks. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson humanity taught us. True advancement isn't about replacing the old with the new, but about finding the strength in both. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I have some push-ups to do. Commander Blackwood would expect nothing less.